right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. The fun of dying. Just by virtue of the sentiment the title implies, you might assume that the following discussion will be light, innocent, and even a touch naive. Well, I can assure you this is anything but. In my conversation with attorney and afterlife researcher Roberta Grimes, we take a critical and evidence-based look at what happens when we die. From quantum theory and breakthroughs in consciousness research to debunking the debunkers, and even first-hand reports from those who have died, Roberta Grimes has collected what some may say is irrefutable evidence that not only is there an afterlife, but yes, it can and often is fun. Take a listen. Roberta, you really covered the gamut when it comes to the subject of the afterlife in your book, The Fun of Dying. Now, at the outset, for those who may not be familiar with your book and where this name came from, the title might seem a bit paradoxical. I mean, we're talking about perhaps the most feared and dreaded and yet inevitable event that all of us will experience. And needless to say, probably have already experienced at least several times in our reincarnational cycles. And here you are saying, heck, not only can dying be fun, but according to those who have died, it is fun. Can you explain?
Well, I wanted to call the book Dying for Idiots because I thought Dying for Dummies would be taken. But then it was accepted for publication, but they said you got to change the title, and I couldn't think of a title. And then one morning I woke up and there were 3 titles in my mind: The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, and The Fun of Growing Forever. And of course now I know where they came from. My guide put them in my mind. So that was where the title of the first book came from, and I knew that in due time there would be more. And when suddenly it was time to use those titles, I did. It was just, I do so little on my own. It's all a team effort.
Right. Well, we were talking a little bit offline about that process, and if I may say, and I think you did say at least once before publicly that this was a channeled work. And I mean, our audience is well familiar with that process, and needless to say, I think that the channeling process is probably far more common than we know in any creative endeavor. So
totally.
Yes.
In fact, I think I've come to the conclusion that most people who write actually are to some extent. They certainly have guides working with them, and in many cases the guides are the ones who lead the process. I've tried to write without, just on my own. I think I'll write about this, and I can't. That's not possible. I can't even make a sentence.
Interesting. Isn't that interesting? Well, that could take us down a whole another tangent about, do we have original thoughts? I mean, are any of the thoughts our own? But still, we are perhaps the medium for which the work comes through from another realm, but we're still all connected to it. So, well,
totally.
let's get into this book, and there's so many different areas that I'd like to touch on in one short hour, and let's see how many we can hit. Now, I want to talk about someone who's a colleague of yours in the field of law. Roberta is an attorney, practicing attorney. This individual's name is Victor Zamet. And, I've known Victor's work for years. He wrote the foreword to your book. He's incredibly respected in this field of work, and I was so excited when I saw that he wrote the foreword. I've heard you say, Roberta, that there are quite a few attorneys that have gotten into this area of afterlife research. Why do you think this is so?
Well, I think one of the things that law school does is to teach you how to think. That's the main thing it did for me. And to teach you how to do research in a disciplined way and to assemble a case, which is how, Victor talks directly about that. His first book, I think, was The Allure Presents a Case for the Afterlife.
That's right.
I mean, this is, to him, it's very much an area of research that springs from his legal background. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's just, it teaches you how to think, and it teaches you how to assemble evidence and to analyze it in a rational way. Mm-hmm. The best researchers are skeptics by nature, and I think that many lawyers are taught to be skeptical of what they read, and how to, either rule it in or rule it out, how to debunk things and or how to affirm them by the kind of research they do. That's all I can think of really as why, but you're right. There are quite a few who are interested in this field.
Yeah, interesting. I have a feeling that's got several layers to it. I'd like to survey, as we spoke about, I happen to be married to one of those attorneys, and I wouldn't call him, well, I suppose he has a skeptical aspect to him, but he's certainly not doing this research. He has to listen to me talk about it, though. Yeah, so interesting. Yep. Yeah. Let's talk about the debunkers, since you brought that up. The debunkers in this field, you devote some time in your book to how these individuals invest in trying to debunk the reality of an afterlife, despite the amazing swath of historical evidence that you and I both know exist. Do you think, here's my question, do you think that those who are so vehement about discrediting this work might have an ulterior motive? I mean, why all of this energy and resources and determination coming from these types of people? What's their goal? What are they trying to do?
They're trying to feed the kids. I mean, most of them now, it's been interesting to watch this development, but understand where it comes from. There are some who trace it all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, where they divided knowledge into two spheres, spiritual and physical, and never the twain shall meet. Now, we know that, of course, that's nonsense. But what happened was in the late 19th and early 20th century, there were two big developments that happened at about the same time. The first is, and I think they're connected, the first is, of course, that Max Planck and other leading physicists discovered that there's a whole new kind of physics, folks. It's not all Newtonian. And they came up with quantum mechanics, which is obviously correct, but it doesn't fit with the original physics, the Newtonian version, which is essentially physical. And where quantum physics is not obviously physical. And anyway, they can't put them together. And so just as they were tearing their hair out over this, we began to get excellent communications from people we used to think were dead, but primarily through deep trance mediums and channels. Such excellent evidence that there were serious researchers who got involved and studied the deep trance mediums, and there were books compiled of the evidence that they had come up with, studying proofs of their own existence these people had put out, and it was published. This was when we were supposed to do the synthesis that's only now happening, and this was more than 100 years ago. We were supposed to come up with a stunning conclusion that there's one reality, not two, and that reality is essentially spiritual. But the people whose livelihoods were invested in physics would not allow that to happen. Instead, they came up with what they called the fundamental dogma of science. And you could find this back then in print. They're too smart to put it in print anymore, but they still live by it. And that is that basically they won't look at anything that hints at a spirituality or a God. Science literally will not. You can't get published in a peer-reviewed journal or teach in a university if you look at the whole body of what we call afterlife evidence, and really all the evidence that has to do with what's actually going on. This happened more than 100 years ago, and almost immediately science went into the weeds, and they've been in the weeds ever since. It's really pathetic to see. But because the mainstream, and we've talked about this, you and I, mainstream people are starting to get a clue about that a lot of things are being kept from them. For example, near-death experiences clearly happen, and they clearly indicate a whole lot more is going on. So what they've got to do, these people who are desperately defending their dogma, is they've got to come up with ways to debunk the evidence.
Right.
How do you do that? What they all do is look at what they think. They don't actually study the phenomenon. Those who do, by the way, change sides. They say, okay, this is a valid phenomenon, and there are great examples of people who've done that. But for the most part, what they're trying to do is make it go away. So they look at what they think are some important claims. They come up with a way to produce whatever that phenomenon is physically, and they say, okay, that explains it all. No more near-death experiences, and go on. It's crazy. It's stupid. There's nothing about it that's scientific, but that's what they do.
Defending an arcane Newtonian model.
A primitive concept, which is, well, number one, anything with a dogma is a belief system. That's what dogmas are. They are fundamental statements of belief. And therefore, science, in essence, turned itself into the religion of atheism more than 100 years ago, and that's what it remains.
Wow.
For so long as it thinks there's a dogma, and a dogma is something that science should follow, then they're totally unable to look at reality in any kind of way. And it makes for a strange situation that we're in, because we actually know more about reality than the scientists do at this point, because we're studying it without a bias.
Right. Well, I think for sure it's promoting mass cognitive dissonance, because let's face it, Roberta, there are so many people that are having experiences of their own. They don't know what bucket to put it in. They feel like they have to put it in some sort of a dogmatic, framework in order to quantify it for themselves. And so when you have still this pervasiveness of fiercely defending a Newtonian or a classical model, it makes for a confusion and absolute, questioning your own sanity. So that's not fun. I want to get to the fun. We're going to have to continue to think on our own. Well, you're segueing me beautifully into, as I'm looking at my little cheat sheet here and talking about quantum physics. Now, you do say that clearly this is not necessarily your bailiwick. I might argue differently, because you did a pretty good job of weaving it into the whole idea of a pot of evidence for the afterlife. Let's talk about that. I mean, you mentioned specifically the idea of time and space and matter and energy. How does this area of science factor into bringing the case for the afterlife?
Well, the way that afterlife researchers began to look seriously at quantum mechanics, what really was by the latter part of and the very end of the 20th century, we had figured out what was going on. We all reached the same conclusions independently, so it's pretty clear this is what's going on. But one of the things that really confused us was that the physics of what we think of as the afterlife, it's really real life, was so different from the physics here. I mean, you could travel across the entire universe, physical universe, in an eye blink, for example. Everything is mind created. Just all of it made no sense to us. It all exists exactly where we are. How is that possible? I mean, if they're not up on clouds, they're in the same place we are. Then what we needed was a way to make that physics make sense. And then within the first few years after this century started, we started to get very good quantum physics for dummies books. And we all read those books and we went, aha, now understand it. Quantum physics seems to be a plug between the entirely consciousness-based physics that exists in most of reality and the math-based artificial physics that exists just in the physical universe, which is a tiny part of what even physicists know exists.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that's why we came to it. But no, I think the fact that I've never taken a physics course has been a great advantage, because I didn't have anything to unlearn.
Well, I certainly am a far cry from knowing a bit about, well, a little bit maybe on the fringes of the quantum mechanics model. And my audience is tired of me saying this, because I give this guy a plug constantly, and that's Michael Talbot of the Holographic Universe. That shifted my paradigm.
A truly brilliant man.
Isn't that something? I just
someone could write a book like, almost 30 years ago, and have it still be on the cutting edge is by itself incredible.
Absolutely. Well, I just had a conversation with someone on air about Michael Talbot, not solely, but he was included in the conversation. And I believe he didn't admit it publicly, but that this book perhaps was a channeled body of work. And it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I believe it totally was. Yes. Yeah.
Incredible.
Because it couldn't be as brilliant as it is. I don't know. He wrote things that I don't think anyone could have written back then if it had not come from elsewhere.
Right.
If people are interested in a simple quantum physics for dummies book that works, read Quantum Enigma. It's anybody can understand it and read it. Now, Michael Talbot's book is absolutely brilliant, but it's a little harder for all of us to understand. But Quantum Enigma will basically show you exactly what we're talking about.
That sounds great. And that's still in publication, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I think you may be able to find it for free on the internet at this point.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly put a link. We'll put a link to Amazon. We'll give Amazon a little plug.
That'd be nice. Yeah, the authors should be given a little plug.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, where do we go from here? Let's talk about time, Roberta. Let's talk about time, or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know, where are we here now? This is a subject that has always fascinated me. And when I started to broach the idea through my own research of time being a construct, a man-made construct, in fact, and
Yes.
that, you know, in this multifaceted universe for which we live, multidimensional, most of these environments are absent of time, including the afterlife. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that was another of the things that was confusing to us. Time and space both are, which and they tend to be mentioned in the same breath, because partly because it's a factor of space is a factor of time, and time is a factor of space. It takes a while to go through space, but if there were no space, there would be no time needed to traverse it. Well, it turns out there is no such thing as space. It's a construct of this material universe, and there is no such thing as time either. Where we come from, and where we go back to, neither exists. And yet, it seems to us that this mind-constructed reality, which we think of as the afterlife, is much bigger than here. It's imagine 7 or 8 universes, and that's how big it is. But they're all places we could visit, all of them in an eye blink, because there's no such thing as time. It doesn't take us any time to get to it. A whole other part of reality. That's hard to get your mind around, because here we sit, you know, and if you decide you're going to Paris for the weekend, it's going to be an undertaking. However, it isn't there. You can go anywhere on Earth or anywhere in the universe, and it doesn't take any time at all.
And don't we, when we sleep, what's happening there? Yeah, I hadn't planned on bringing this up, but let's talk about the sleep state. And I have heard countless researchers and experiencers of OBEs and other areas compare the process of being in a sleep state like being in an afterlife state. We travel, we're more thought responsive and creating environments, etc.
As a mechanical fact, just an artifact of the fact that we're having this weird, strange experience on this artificial reality, which we call the universe, we don't ever need to sleep. Our bodies need to sleep, though. So while our bodies are sleeping, we have our private time. We get to get out of our bodies and travel astrally. We all do this. And as far as we're able to determine, this is a universal for people. We can travel to the end of the universe. We can travel to go see our dead loved ones. We can travel to, many of us meet almost nightly with our spirit guides, especially if we're working on some work for them, which more than we realize of us, are actually our avatars for guides who need to have work done on Earth, and we're just doing that work and we don't even know it. But as part of that process, we do sometimes travel very far. We're attached to our bodies by what's called a silver cord. It's an energy cord, and it's just as tough and strong as you can imagine. During our lifetimes, it doesn't matter how far we go. We trail that cord with us, and that's how we get home again, but to our bodies. But when it's time for us truly to go home, the cord breaks, and we go to the next level of reality very easily.
I'm thinking of that silver cord and how that is connected to the umbilical cord at birth.
It probably isn't. I have a friend who, there's a vagus nerve or some major nerve in our bodies, and she has found evidence that that's where the silver cord actually connects. But it's not a mechanical cord at all. Our bodies are made up of nested energy bodies, like a Matryoshka doll, a Russian doll.
Right.
They're nested.
Yes.
And the outer two appear to be the physical body that we see, that's made out of the same matter we think we see around us. And then the very outermost one is an energy body, which we think of as our aura. It's a defensive system against negative energies, which if we didn't have an aura, we would be under constant attack from negative entities. And then all of the interior, and we aren't sure how many there are, but there are interior bodies, and most of them simply gather as energy in our chest and then lead through the top of the head or through the chest wall. There are people who can see this happen. In fact, there's a video on the internet of a rat being suddenly trapped, And you can see when the rat dies, just this mist rises and disappears.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
it's not just it's not just people, it's animals as well.
Sure.
It's a natural part of the death process.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to talk about that too. I too have surveyed individuals that have been bedside of individuals in the dying process. In fact, a cousin of mine who was bedside as his godfather was passing away, and this person is the most lay individual, not into these subjects at all, but he said, Alexis, I saw a mist escape as my godfather took his last breath. I saw it rise out of his body.
Yep,
and
isn't it wonderful?
it's an amazing thing, and I know this has been captured on film on occasion.
Yes.
So we're seeing that essence of just. Is that the soul? What is that?
I'll tell you in 1 second, but just to finish that thought, which thank you for saying all of that. There's a book called, a 2010 book by Raymond Moody, who was one of our great godfathers in this field. It's called Glimpses of Eternity. And what he studied was what he calls shared deathbed experiences. He coined the term, of course, near-death experiences, and now he's coined shared deathbed experiences. And it's the kinds of experiences people have like that. They get to see a mist. In some extreme cases, they actually get to go with the person who has left the body partway on this journey.
I know someone that has. I know someone that accompanied her sister across the bridge, as she said. But go ahead. Yes.
Yes, but that's it. Glimpses of Eternity, Raymond Moody. Read that book. It's like all his books. It's easy to read.
Yeah, I have that one.
Yeah, isn't it great?
It's great. Absolutely. Oh, there's so much. Let's go from that. We're going to fit a lot of stuff in here today. I want to go from that to the whole phenomenon of deathbed visitors. Again, all of these things that we're talking about, folks, are really lending credence to the idea that to say the least, there's something more and maybe more fun. We're going to get to that. But all of these elements of which you touch upon and in some cases go into great detail brilliantly in your book are making the case. These bedside visitors that I personally, once again, have talked to individuals who have been by the bedside that have witnessed the person dying saying, oh, look, there's Auntie I don't know who. In some cases, there's strangers. Yes. Let's talk about that. Too common to ignore for sure.
Within the people tell me that, especially people who are like dying of cancer, say, death isn't fun. No, we've got to have the body weak enough for it to release us, and getting the body weak enough can be very much unfun. But within a day or two of when the death is going to happen, there's very often a surge of people who have been in a coma might wake up. There's what's called terminal lucidity. Even people who have Alzheimer's will be sitting up in bed talking normally and recognizing people. This is a very common phenomenon. It means death has
imminent.
Basically begun. The process has begun. And usually during this time, sometimes earlier even, people will see people that you sitting there listening to them talk don't think are there because you can't see them. And they're typically whoever they're most likely to trust. So they might be childhood pets, they might be typically their spouses and or parents, could be a whole crowd of people. They generally appear in the upper corners of the room, and sometimes they stay there and the dying person will just lie and look at a corner of the room. You think they're spaced out, but they're talking in their mind with their visitor. And sometimes they'll come down and walk around the room. Sometimes people will see them, like your friend. They will see people who are you don't think are there. But what's universal among them is they're all happy. They all look young and healthy, no matter how old they were when they died. And when you see that person or that group of people appear, you realize, okay, you're going to be fine too, because look at them. They obviously came through it just fine. And after that, then, the only thing I would suggest to people is when you're out of your body, be sure you go with your visitors, because there is a danger in the period when you first leave your body, you are as clueless about what's happening as a newborn baby is upon leaving the birth canal. Exactly as clueless. You don't know what's going on. It's not something that's going to happen spontaneously. The people who come for you are there to help you transition. So go with them, because you can't help the people around the bed. And this is one reason, if you're at a deathbed, be sure you don't call out to the person or try to get their attention when they're dying, because you can cause them to become earth.
Are these people that you're talking about?
You respond to that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We got a little crossover there. Apologies. When you speak of the people, Roberta, that are coming for the dying person, is this who you refer to as rescuers, or is that something different?
No, this is normal. This is a normal process. These are just deathbed visitors. Rescuers are a different kind of helper. They don't have to know the person, but their job is to get the attention of people who have become earthbound. It's a serious risk.
Yeah.
And rescue work is going on all around us. Dead people are doing the rescue work, but also there are living people who do this. I had an experience of it because I was Bruce Moen is someone who has been doing rescue work his whole life, and I took a seminar with him, and he swore to me I could do it. I said, no way, I'm as psychic as a post. But I did. I rescued a woman who died in the 1780s, and her children, dressed like the early 1800s, were waiting for her, and I brought her to that person. Why would I be able to do it when the little boy that I imagined next to me, who really was, what Bruce said was, imagine the guy who's doesn't matter how he looks. He needs you to refer to him so that you can get her to pay attention to him. This was a dead person who was relatively high level. She could not perceive him. But since I was a living person, she was able to perceive me. That's one of the problems with rescue work. People who have gotten themselves stuck that way just by being distracted at the wrong moment during their death process can't see people who are completely dead. They've lost that ability. So
right.
But this is going on all the time.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm going to put I don't want to call it devil's advocate. I don't like that term, but I'm talking to an attorney here. I live with one. And so I'm going to come in as one for a moment. Now I'm going to put the personal feeling and philosophy aside, because you and I, but talk to me as the attorney. How do you know this is really happening and not something of the imagination?
I can't tell you for sure, because I've not done it as a routine thing. I have studied the phenomenon. I understand how people get stuck, and I understand the process of rescue. And part of what I do, which I think all good researchers do, is we're very critical of any new information that comes along and very skeptical of it until we can see how it will fit. Because if you accept just any old thing, you're not going to build a puzzle that makes any sense. Everything has to fit. So I get how it has to fit. I had explained to me what the process would be and how it would unfold, but no details. They didn't say this is who you're going to see. Nobody gave me these suggestions. And the last thing I could imagine was somebody who is sitting in a courtyard, and I actually resisted seeing this. As I was told, now you're approaching someone who needs to be rescued. I didn't want to see this old woman, and she was very cranky, frankly. And she was dressed. She had died in her old age, but she was still thinking about herself as young. So she was dressed like someone from the 1740s, and she still was using a spinning wheel. I mean, it was just very strange. I would never have made that up.
So this was a spontaneous image that came to you that you initially resisted, you're saying?
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let me add to the caseload here. I'm going to give you a little story that would, and this is how me as a researcher corroborate to the best of our ability anecdotally, because this is really what we're dealing with. Let me give you a little snippet of a true story of an individual that I did not know personally, but a dear friend of mine's daughter was best friends with. This is a young man who unfortunately committed suicide a couple of years ago. And this, again, my friend's daughter, they were friends. Good. In fact, I think they were dating at one point. Now, my friend's daughter and my dear friend have a sense themselves. I would, not actively, but they I think they have an inherited psychic sense or intuitive sense. This particular individual, who we'll call Sam, not his real name, shortly after he took his own life, was repeatedly appearing before both my friend and her daughter, in some cases together. Haunting, literally haunting. Now, the point I want to get to is, and I tried to get her on the phone knowing that I would be talking to you to get a little bit more of the detail. But as I recall, this went on for a couple of months, I believe, that they were both seeing this young man in a distressed state almost daily. At some point, I remember my friend telling me, guess what? Sam has been rescued. We saw, my daughter and I both witnessed, whether astrally or I don't know, I think she was describing it as if it was happening in front of them, the image of another individual who I think they knew, who had passed, who Sam didn't even know in life, someone that they knew, watched him come for Sam and take Sam away. And after that image played out for both she and her daughter, Sam was never seen again.
Isn't that wonderful?
So there you go. I just helped to make your case.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah.
And you hear these stories over and over again. I mean, look, the work that both you and I are in, and you've obviously done a lot more research in this niche area than I have, but having brushed that area of research, you hear these stories and the common threads, and they're all of them, each one will have a unique dimension to it, but there are these common threads that cannot be refuted, right? They just can't. Wow.
That's right.
Let's talk about after-death levels. We love our levels. We love our time and our space and our hierarchy and levels. And you do say that we don't experience that stuff over there the same way. And yet, you, as well as other researchers, have talked about after-death, let's say, states, going from perhaps a denser to a lighter experience. Let's talk about that for a bit.
One of the things that interests me a little bit is I'm coming to believe that we're actually influencing what happens when people get there. Now that we have this good information and we've come up with some ideas, they seem to be using those ideas to make it easier for people to recognize who they are. Just a little bit of evidence of that, but I find it fascinating. Mm. But the researchers, the very earliest researchers, and I think this is even in the Bible, talk about 7 levels of the afterlife. And we have made that very conventional. The 7 levels are, the lowest is what Jesus called the outer darkness, where there'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Above that is like a purgatory level. And then levels 3 through 5 are what we call the Summerland. That's a Viking term. The beautiful, earth-like, gorgeous levels, with the top of the Summerland levels, level 5 being unbelievably beautiful. Level 6 we used to think was not even material. That was where the very highest level beings go. Now we understand that it is material and even more beautiful, and it contains great universities. And level 7 was the source level. Well, you couldn't go higher than that, could you? Now we know you can. That's not the top. But you can find books all over the place that basically put this out as absolutely true. And the highest level being I have ever known, I never knew him in life, but his name is Mikey Morgan. He was a 6th level being, very high level, very advanced being who had last lived in the 1600s, and decided he wanted to be able to teach us. But of course, he couldn't relate to people living today. So he came back for a brief 20-year Earth life. And now he communicates with his mother, and through her, he's written a book called Flying High in Spirit, a young snowboarder's account of his ride through heaven, because he loved to snowboard when he was here, and he still does it there. But when he first saw how we were looking at the afterlife levels, he said, that's all new to me. I don't ever think of levels. I just think of going someplace and I go someplace. Now, the higher you are, the easier it is to think of it that way, because travel is instantaneous, because you can go anywhere. People at the lowest levels cannot go higher. And what do I mean by at the lowest levels? It's all about your consciousness vibration. Your consciousness, each of us is consciousness. That's all we are. And at the lowest level of vibration are all the horrible, ishy emotions. Fear is the core bad emotion, but there's grief, anger, hatred, all the negative stuff down there. And the closer you are to that level, the less you can do. You may not even be able to get as high as level 3. The highest vibration is infinite perfect love. This is all, Jesus says this in the Gospels. The highest vibration is perfect love. And when you are vibrating at that level, which Mikey is, you can go anywhere. You literally, it's unlimited what you can do.
That's interesting. I've heard you bring this up before. I believe it was with George Norrie on his great program Beyond Belief, where you talked about you're sort of quarantined, if you will. I'm paraphrasing. If you're finding yourself as your residence in a lower level, that it's difficult, if not impossible, to go any higher. And yet, I don't know. It's a very interesting thing. I'm thinking of my good friend and colleague, William Buhlman, who's out-of-body researcher and experiencer, and his discussions about the thought-responsive environments in the out-of-body state. But even, he says, in the astral, in some cases, the astral is thought of as a lower level, but you still have the ability to be thought responsive. In other words, creating environments just on instantaneous thought. So
yeah, totally. Yeah. The higher your vibration, your consciousness vibration, the more powerfully you can create things.
Sure, agreed.
When Jesus says, if you have as much faith as a grain of mustard seed, just this little tiny belief, you can tell a mountain, go throw yourself in the ocean, and it will obey you. Well, that's an extreme way of saying the same thing. If you are vibrating at a high enough level, you have the power. Just by virtue of your own mind's power. You have the power to do just about anything. That's how they build stuff there. Yeah. More advanced beings come after you design the house you want. They come and they think it into existence, and it's as solid as can be.
Are you familiar with the Seth material by Jane Roberts?
I have seen a little of it.
Okay.
One of the rules I made early in my work was that I was not going to trust anything channeled or received after 1950, because I knew I didn't want to corrupt what I felt pretty confident had come from naive truth tellers.
Right.
I didn't corrupt it with anything that was coming through someone trying to make a dollar.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some flagrant charlatans.
There's no question. Still are.
I'm sorry?
Still are. There still are. Yeah.
So I don't read any of that stuff, but what little I have been told about it suggests that it may be genuine.
Oh, I happen to be pretty well read in the Seth material, and although I don't necessarily have an affinity to channeled material per se, it was just the body of work that was intriguing. But the reason why I bring that material up is because of the famous adage of his, YCYOR, or you create your own reality. And it just reminds me, the way he described, or this entity described that, is very similar in, with the caveat that you understand, A, that you can, and B, that there's a faith in that process. Mm-hmm. So it all kind of jives. It all, to me, kind of corroborates each other, which is quite interesting. That's
part of what's intriguing and really addicting about this work. The more of it you do, the more you begin to see how it all fits together. And wherever you started, we're all working toward the same middle, and we're all putting together this gigantic tapestry together.
Absolutely. Well, you've done a fantastic job in adding some serious thread to the tapestry, for sure.
Thank you, dear.
I'm telling you didn't leave any stone unturned as far as I can see. You also talk about the advent, well, I'm talking about the advent of technology, but specifically, let's talk about ITC, which is instrumental transcommunication, and of that, EVP, electronic voice phenomena. I have always found that fascinating, and you do touch on that in your book. Let me ask you a question. EVP or ITC, which includes EVP, has been around for quite some time, even when the devices were not nearly as slick as they are now. But here comes this new version of technology, this digital world that we live in. And I got to tell you, Roberta, I'm hearing from so many people that are telling me of sort of anomalies coming through devices and computers, including orbs and voices and other such things. Have you heard this as well? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's an explosion of stuff going on, and it's all being initiated not on this level, but on the level of what we think of as the afterlife. A lot of experts, a lot of names you would know, are working very hard to come up with electronic methods of communication. And they tell us it's going to bear fruit. The trouble is, we're there. There's no time. So they'll say, oh, by the end of the year, or oh, within 2 years. And it's turning out to be, for various reasons, very difficult to do, because what they're trying to do is lay what they call fiber optic cable, which again, I'm sure that's a metaphor, but through the lowest levels. The lowest levels are full of negative entities. And there's one particular kind of negative entity that feeds on human negative emotions, primarily fear. And once everybody understands there's no death and we're going home to a much better place, there won't be any fear and they're going to starve. So what they did for years was to block, it was sort of like trying to lay the telegraph cable across the Wild West. The Indians were out to get the people who were doing the laying of cable, and they blocked it for years. But we seem to have gotten past that. And there are now, they have what are called stations in what we think of as the afterlife. And these stations actually are very much are communication stations where you can go, if you happen to be a dead person, you can go and talk to living people. And living people can talk to dead people, and it's happening right now.
Okay, we've got to talk about this for a minute. Let's elaborate. I'm not going to let you let this go. I have never heard that. Stations, really a sort of, what would you call it? Not a clearinghouse. That's not what. Reiterate that, because that I have never heard before.
What they're trying to do is
they use who? Well, let me just, when you say they, okay,
names. What are some names? Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Niels Bohr. There are a lot of them whose names you don't know, but there are some very serious people whose names you do that are working on this. And they began really in the 70s and 80s working with our existing electronics. They would do things like leave detailed messages on computers not attached to anything. And even turned off computers. They've used telephones. There are recorded calls received from people we used to think were dead on telephones.
I'm aware of that. ADCs, actually. And let me just throw in Thomas Edison.
They soon came to see that what they had to do was come up with an infrastructure there and then teach us how to connect. They've had to lead this parade. So what they decided to do is come up with stations. And the first one, because you're aware that in Portugal there's been a tremendous amount of work. Her name is Cardosa, and she's done a great deal of work with ITC. Mm-hmm. And there were also people in Europe who were doing great work. So the first station was in Portuguese. It was established. And the primary person they established it with is Sonia Rinaldi in Brazil. So she's several years ahead of us. But she is now able to use this station to communicate not only with the dead, and the first people that they wanted to have able to communicate were children communicating with their parents. So she's been doing that. Hundreds of parents a week get to communicate in Portuguese with their children. But she's also now working at their behest with communicating with the minds of unborn children, communicating with people who have never been able to communicate and are in comas or are nonverbal. They're doing all of this in Portugal. And so a few years ago, I believe it was 3 years ago now, they decided they wanted to establish a North American station, which will be in English and therefore a lot easier for people to use. And I'll tell you why the language matters in a second. But Craig Hogan and a group of people were chosen to do this. Craig Hogan is a dear friend of mine. And so they literally are working with the North American station to begin to make it possible for the station to really work. As I say, they're a few years behind Sonia. But the way it seems to work is that because we don't have vocal cords, when we're there, our bodies don't need vocal cords. Most of the communication is telepathic. So what they're coming up with is a way for people to, in these stations, think something, it gets translated by their thought into words that will be heard on this level, and in the voice of the person who once lived, and then they will be able to speak to living people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is
groundbreaking, to say the least.
Rocket science. This is kind of like rocket science.
It sure is. Do you have any links that you can share with us that I can post to so people can learn more about this work that's going on?
Well, if you just Google Craig Hogan, he has a bunch of websites, and on them he has two things that will be interesting to people. One is he has a method. He can teach you to be able to spontaneously communicate with your dead loved ones. It's a process. It's like 8 lessons, and you got to work at it. But I hear from people who are thrilled with his communication technique. But then also look for work with stations, or look for.
Yes.
I mean, I'm trying quickly to find it. I don't know exactly there, but it's. If you go to afterlifestudies.org, that's the website of the symposium we're holding in September, and this is going to be one of the topics at the symposium. So you probably can find Sonia Rinaldi listed as one of the presenters on the symposium that's held in September on afterlifestudies.org, and then look from there and you'll learn all about the stations.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have not, and I don't know about our audience, has anyone heard about this phenomenon before? And it's so interesting that you bring up the likes of Niels Bohr and I would imagine Nikola Tesla and Einstein.
Tesla's big in this too.
I would absolutely imagine, as well as Thomas Edison. What I had started to say is this is very interesting because those who have done research, afterlife research, particularly with EVP, will know that it was Thomas Edison just prior to his dying that was working diligently on, he was convinced that he could create a device for successful EVP. This is well documented. And so for him to be involved in this project on the other side would make perfect sense.
Yes, it does.
Wowee. This is huge. Oh my God. I can't wait I'm enjoying talking to you, but as soon as we hang up, I'm going to go check that out, the stations. That's amazing. Let's get into the fun. We're running out of time, and I think this whole thing is fun, frankly. But let's get into the fun of this. I have heard you say, Roberta, that the dead who have communicated their experiences back to us in the physical world have described their experiences as not only fun, but even euphoric and sometimes even orgasmic.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, we think we have a monopoly on things. We don't. Well, to begin with, right at the start, leaving your body is described as immensely pleasurable, to leave it for the last time. And I suppose that would be just because you're suddenly young and healthy, and you were living in a boat anchor there in that dead body. So naturally that's going to feel good. But they say it literally can feel orgasmic to leave your body. And once you have transitioned, they tend not to do, although there are reports that it happens, they tend not to do physical sex at all, although we're apparently anatomically able to do it. But they have something much better. And they say it produces a whole body orgasm. And they're standing up. You don't have to even be related in any way. One of them steps into the other. They literally occupy the same space. It's like the ultimate hug, and they say there's no pleasure like it. And so that's what they do if they would like to do something that's really pleasurable.
May I ask how often this has come forward? I mean, I once again, you're digging up some stuff that I have never heard. Is this common? The reporting of this orgasmic and euphoric experience?
Understand, most of this is not even unusual to them. So it's not on this plane, because we have so little pleasure, we focus on a pleasure that to them seems like
it's
because
normal,
right. Everything they do is pleasurable there. What I just talked about is pleasurable, but even just listening to music is entirely different and much more pleasurable experience there. Sure, yeah. Traveling and seeing things you've never seen and interacting with loved ones in a much more intense way. Everything is pleasure to them. Mm. I mean, that's why it's so much fun. There is nothing that's not pleasurable. And here we are sort of starved for pleasure, so we focus on sex, which to them, you don't need it because you're not procreating. And as my friend Mikey Morgan says, there's no sex drive. Without the sex drive, you really don't care about sex. And he died at 20. He says, I understand how it is there, but that's not how it is here.
Mm-hmm. This is the snowboarder. That's still snowboarding.
The snowboarder.
Did he die snowboarding, by the way? Did he die that way?
Yeah, he still snowboards. He says it's way better there. He says now he's as good as Shaun White. I have no idea who that is.
I don't know.
But apparently he's a big deal snowboarder.
But he died snowboarding in this life? Is that what happened to him?
No, he died in an accident in the Rockies, but it was a planned death. I mean, we all plan our exits. We usually plan 2 or 3 into our lives. And his last exit point was at 20, but he said, I was having so much fun, I just stuck around till my last exit point. And then he died in a rollover accident in the Rockies.
Wow. Well, but he's snowboarding now, so something else.
Yeah, now he snowboards whenever he darn well feels like it.
Yeah. Well, he changed channels, right? And that's something else a term that you use, that you describe the transition into the afterlife as nothing more than changing channels. And it reminds me of, are you familiar with the work of Dannion Brinkley?
Of course.
Okay. Dannion's a dear friend, and I've had him on the show before, and I love when he the way he puts it. He says, heaven is nothing more than a shift of focus. And again, these descriptions certainly seem to jive. But how would you elaborate on that? How are we just changing channels in your estimation?
Well, I understand that the only thing that exists is what we think of as human consciousness. This is something Max Planck discovered, but they ignore altogether his biggest discovery and just focus on the little particles parts. What we are doing as people right now is our mind is like a TV set, and it's tuned to this channel, this level of reality, and this body on this level of reality. That's really what's going on. When we die, all that happens is our body is, we don't need anymore. We tune the TV that is our mind to a slightly higher channel, very slightly higher. We pick up a whole new solid reality, just as if you went from your channel 5 and it looks solid to you to channel 6, it looks solid to you. That's exactly how it feels. It's that quick and that easy. And it all happens in the same place. Your TV didn't move and your mind doesn't move.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And yet, we kind of touched on this before, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, and you brought this up in the book, and that's the aspect or the situations, hopefully less common, in which it isn't fun. And perhaps it isn't easy. We're talking about those, we touched on this before, they're perhaps earthbound, that might get stuck in the outer realms, save for their rescuers that will hopefully come for them, and they'll go with to another level. Let's talk about that a little bit more. And how common do you think that is? How many stuck people, not numbers per se, but how common is it, you think?
Well, I asked my friend Bruce Moen, who took me on that wonderful journey, and he says there are so many that I wish everyone were doing it, doing rescue work. Apparently, it's very, very common. And remember, these people are kind of in a limbo because most of them don't even realize. Many of them don't realize they're dead.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And they're out of time. So they're in a strange situation where what they seem to do for the most part is go through the same afternoon for sometimes centuries. They don't. I mean, of course, from Massachusetts as we are, there are a lot of very old houses there, and I spent many years in Plymouth. Well, there are a lot of really old 1600s houses there. What sometimes happens in these old houses is these people are stuck. It still looks to them the way it looked when they died.
Sure.
They don't know anything has changed. So people will say, well, there's this woman we sometimes see, but she stands by that place in the wall, and then she walks over here, and she walks through the wall. Well, there used to be a fireplace, a large fireplace with cranes and kettles. In that place where she now stands, she's working. And then there was a doorway that's now blocked off, and she walks through the doorway because it's still there in her mind.
Wow.
It's a tragic situation, and which is why anybody who's interested in doing something worthwhile could learn to do rescue work, because there are so many people who need it.
And you feel it's something that most people, if not all people, could do if they so desired?
Well, I rescued a woman who died, I think it was 1787. I can't remember the details now, but I definitely remember the woman. And I was told to bring her to her children. I said, I have no idea how to do that. And they said, stick with this little boy you imagined. He will take you there. And sure enough, we ended up on a street corner where all these people dressed in the early 1800s garb that they had worn in life, when they saw us approaching with that woman, they lost their minds with excitement.
Oh, my goodness.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But I was there, and I certainly wouldn't have made up any of that. I had no interest in making up anything like that.
Isn't that something? Well, I wish that we had a 2-hour, because this would bring me all the way back to the idea of the holographic aspect of reality. I think there's a connection.
Yes.
What are we really, when people living people perceive ghostly apparitional figures, of which it happens all the time, I've always questioned what is actually taking place here. I mean, are we interspersed with other realities simultaneously? Can they see us just because we can see them? Can they see us? Are there, it just leads us it can lead us down a whole another rabbit hole. It's just completely fascinating.
And people need to understand too that the mind you have here is a tiny aspect of your internal mind, which is, we aren't sure about how much. It's like 5 or 10%, if that, of your internal mind. Mm-hmm. And we strip down. Think of this as a spiritual gym. We come here to learn spiritual lessons, and just as you're going to the gym, you strip down to your gym clothes. We've stripped down to kind of our gym mind to come here. And we've forgotten nearly everything we know. It's basically behind an amnesia wall that we will then pierce. And when we get back, very soon after we arrive, we'll get back all that stuff we had packed up and put aside. Mm-hmm. And we'll know so much more. And we'll be able to do so much more with our minds. So they tell us there are a lot of things you simply will not be able to understand until you get back to who you really are. Right.
Absolutely. Well, sounds fun to me. Sounds like a journey that, we're all going to take it, right? So we might as well get somewhat acclimated. And thanks to your beautiful book, The Fun of Dying, find out what really happens next. I think we will get a good glimpse. Now, this book is part of a series of fun books that I think you mentioned before that include The Fun of Staying in Touch, The Fun of Growing Forever, and The Fun of Living Together. Where can people find these books, Roberta?
Well, they theoretically are available in all bookstores through Ingram, but most bookstores don't stock only the current books. Mm-hmm. So I would go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and they're also available in 34 languages nationwide. They're available as audiobooks and, of course, as Kindle. So there's no excuse.
No excuse whatsoever. Well, I'm going to add to the no excuse list because we will have links to each and every one. So it's time to start having fun, everybody. Right, Roberta?
and for certain, I answer every email. So if you have any questions, just go to robertagrimes.com, right. Hit the contact block, and send me a note. And I always, sometimes it takes a couple days nowadays. I used to say, if you don't hear in 24 hours, send flowers, but I can't say that anymore. Roberta, but I do love answering questions and just saying hi.
Excellent. robertagrimes.com. We will have that hyperlinked as well. Well, Roberta, thank you. Yeah, this has been better than anticipated. I knew it was going to be good because it's one of my favorite subjects. But dear. Some of the things that you brought up will just really have me in a contemplative mode for quite some time. And I hope for everyone that's listening too. And I thank you for joining me. Roberta, there's definitely going to be some follow-ups if you'll let me have you on. I would love to continue the discussion. So thanks.
You're terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Likewise. And thanks everyone for listening to Higher Journeys Radio. We'll talk to you real soon. I was truly impressed with the vast knowledge Roberta imparted to us based on the incredible body of work she's amassed over the years with her research. And I could sense her zeal and commitment to staying on the cutting edge of this work. If there's anyone who can make the argument that the afterlife is real and fun, I'd say she is well on her way to winning the case. Be sure to stay up to date with the work of Roberta Grimes by visiting her website, simply robertagrimes.com, or visit her very active Facebook page at facebook.com/Roberta Grimes author. We'll have links to both of these directly at higherjourneys.com. Thanks as always for tuning in to Higher Journeys Radio. Until next time, I'm your host, Alexis Brooks.